Twitter isn't real life. Not too long ago, those four words used to be thrown pretty regularly at voters on the left who might have been at risk of becoming a little too easily convinced that a particular candidate, policy, or position being popular on social media might mean the revolution was just a retweet away. And there was probably some truth to this disconnect between Twitter and reality. Judged solely by Twitter followers, Bernie Sanders would have easily been the Democratic nominee in 2020. Jeremy Corbyn would have wiped the floor with Boris Johnson. Which isn't to say that those politicians didn't have very real-world support, but it was perhaps easy for some left-leaning Twitter power users to get caught up in the hype online, only to look up from their phones and find themselves facing a very different reality. But is the same now happening to the political right? Is Twitter, now X, creating a delusional dream world for conservatives, which, far from sweeping them to victory, has the potential to massively backfire? Since Elon Musk bought Twitter in October 2022, the platform has taken an undeniable march to the right. Part of this is the result of many liberals and legacy media outlets abandoning the app for Blue Sky, Threads, Substack, or in some rare cases, going outside. But it's not just that there's fewer liberal and left-wing voices on X now. There's also been an undeniable shift in which of the thousands and thousands of posts which are made to the site each day are pushed into people's home feeds. In February 2023, The Verge reported that Musk had his engineers tweak X's algorithm to artificially boost the reach of his tweets by a factor of 1,000. Which, alongside paying someone to win at video games for you, is probably the lamest thing that anybody's ever done. And yet, this artificial boosting also appears to extend to Musk's fellow travellers on the global right. I follow vanishingly few conservatives or far-right voices on X. I rarely engage with such accounts, even to criticise. And yet, my feed is an absolute sewer of, frankly, cranks and loonies. It's not even like my feed is populated by articles from The Telegraph or The Spectator or The Sun. At this point, I would kill to be getting recommended articles from The Telegraph. Instead, the voices which are amplified to top volume are the wackiest of conspiracy theorists. And look, let's leave aside the matter of whether or not this is by design. Because Musk would surely argue that this elevation of right-wing perspectives is simply a result of him having freed the bird from the woke mind virus or whatever. In truth, he'd tell us the voices of racists and climate deniers should have always been this loud. The European Commission is currently investigating whether or not X is guilty of information manipulation, and I'm sure Musk will be only too happy to cooperate fully with that investigation in order to clear his name. And yet, whatever the reason for it, it's hard to ignore the absolute chasm which has opened up between the perception of reality which dominates X and the world outside. X isn't real life, but so forcefully has Elon Musk put his thumb on the scales that the right appears to be deluding itself that it is. Let me show you this poll, carried out by More in Common a couple of weeks ago. It focuses on public perceptions of Lucy Connolly, a British woman who was recently released from jail on licence after serving 10 months for inciting racial hatred. In the midst of a series of violent protests held outside hotels housing asylum seekers in July 2024, she published a post to X advocating setting fire to the hotels with those living there still inside. The post was shared just under 1,000 times, and whether directly inspired by Connolly or not, 6 days later, a rioter attempted to follow through on her idea. The online right is obsessed with Lucy Connolly. The prevailing wisdom on X is that she's not a hate-driven individual who openly contemplated people being burned alive in their already overcrowded homes. She's a hero, a victim of censorship. She believes herself to have been Keir Starmer's political prisoner. No matter that she pled guilty to the crime, no matter that she appealed her sentence and lost, no. The overwhelming consensus on X, or at least those posts which rise to the top, is that Lucy Connolly is a real-life Winston Smith. Both X as a corporate entity and Elon Musk himself have deigned to weigh in on the matter, which is less out of the ordinary than you might think. Elon Musk currently has a weird obsession with the UK, which appears to be the result of a combination of him having a teenager's disdain for bedtimes, being hopelessly addicted to his own product, and needing some kind of English language content to engage with whilst he's awake in the middle of the night. Last week, X stated that they would continue to be steadfast in their support of users' right to freedom of speech on the platform. while Elon went for the pithier, "This madness needs to end." And madness is precisely what you would think Lucy Connolly's case had inspired if X was your only view on the UK. There are plenty of Americans who genuinely seem to believe that Keir Starmer is 4 days away from being January 6th. And then this poll was released. It revealed that just 35% of Brits agree with the consensus on X that Connolly's sentence was too harsh. A full 52% of the country think that her 10 months in prison was either about right or too lenient. In fact, while X-Logic would have you believe that politicians should be rallying around Connolly, embracing her for the modern-day Boadicea that she is, that view is confined to just 18% of the population at large, with 51% suggesting that politicians should actively distance themselves from her. Once you begin to recognise how much of an echo chamber X under Elon Musk has become, you begin to realise that the received wisdom of the platform is just completely delusional. This isn't just a platform which is slightly disconnected from the general public, it's an absolute fantasy land. There's a narrative which is taken off both here in the UK and across in the US that Britain is currently a country on the edge. The whole nation one spark away from mass civil unrest. You are witnessing, says one post, the beginnings of a revolution. And it might seem that way if you've spent the afternoon at one of the admittedly well-attended protests which have reconvened outside hotels housing asylum seekers in recent months. Or, more likely, spent the afternoon watching videos of those protests on X. But if getting record numbers to attend a protest had an immediate result, the UK would have imposed sanctions on Israel long ago. Some of these posters might be correct in thinking that there will be pockets of violence ahead. These protests contain large contingents of ex-football hooligans for whom getting into a scrap with the police or counter-protesters is a big part of the appeal of showing up. But there are several right-wing influencers, politicians and journalists in the UK who, absolutely high on their own supply, are currently spending their days tweeting that Britain is on the edge of civil war. And they're clearly excited about the prospect of watching people get their heads kicked in from the comfort of their podcast studios. If you spend your days existing in the bubble of right-wing X, it's a compelling narrative. I live in a navy town, it's hardly some liberal enclave, and yes, some people have put some flags up, but we're a long way off militias setting up checkpoints. Most people are still reserving their anger for long queues at the supermarket and not being able to find a parking space. This right-wing vision of a country primed for revolution is an online fantasy, none of which is to invite complacency. The UK has clearly undergone a significant rightward shift over the past year or so. Nigel Farage's Reform Party have climbed and climbed and climbed in the polls. It would be naive to think that X being a bit out of touch means we're actually an island of secret Starmerites or something. And yet, Nigel Farage's political wins have always come from managing to channel quite broad anti-establishment sentiment, which is a really easy way to win support until it suddenly becomes very hard. Neither posts on X nor responses to polls are particularly good at capturing how deeply someone cares about a given topic. Tweeting something or saying you support something in a poll is just so trivial to do. It's so easy for me to tweet something like, all prospective dog owners should have to undergo mandatory training in how to care for and control their pet, that you don't know whether that's my most treasured belief or whether it's a thing that I just thought of and decided to get everyone else's read on. In fact, there will currently be people leaving comments down below who will be responding to that idea, and the ease of leaving a comment on a YouTube video means that it will be impossible for you to tell whether their right to buy a dog unhindered by the state is something that they would defend to the death, or whether they were merely inspired to offer a response given the topic happened to come up. Nigel Farage, the Reform Party and the broader political right in the UK can rest assured that knowing that their main policy proposal of reduced immigration is something that there is significant support for in the UK. And yet, it's really easy for people to agree with things in the abstract. YouGov recently carried out a poll asking people whether they would accept certain trade-offs in return for reducing immigration. Would they, for example, accept staffing shortages in the US? Or would they accept a downturn in the economy in return for bringing inward migration down? What they found is that even a lot of people who support large-scale deportations in the abstract quickly changed their tune. One can only wonder what would happen when the human cost of a deportation policy became apparent and people in their communities begin to become at risk of being kicked out of the country. There's a subset of power users of X, Elon Musk included, who have viewed polling support for Farage and the rise in right-wing rhetoric on X as evidence that the UK is not only disgruntled with the current government and not only leans towards reducing immigration, but is currently crying out for the most right-wing government possible. Amazingly, Elon Musk no longer even supports Nigel Farage. He switched his backing to an even further right-wing party called Advance UK, which, for someone whose only knowledge of the UK is derived from his X feed, might seem like a popular move. But the number of people in the UK who have even heard of Advance UK, let alone would be likely to support it, is vanishingly small. The British far right and their American patrons are not delusional to think that they currently have some support among the British public. But the Plato's cave of Elon Musk's X has made them completely uninterested in the question of how enduring or fragile that support might be. Elon Musk has created an alternate reality in which the right's every minor victory and every niche political obsession appears 10 times larger and more popular than it actually is. It allows the right to believe that they are heroic freedom fighters, where I would wager that to most people, they just come across as kinda lame. A big Twitter meets reality moment has taken place over the past week, in which the posters have emerged from their houses to tie cheap polyester Union flags and St. George's crosses on lampposts. The somewhat threadbare and confused narrative is that they're pushing back on some vague sense of negativity towards our national flag. To believe X, you'd think that this was a massive rift in society, with people flagging and deflagging lampposts left, right and centre. But the polling around the topic reveals a country which ultimately doesn't seem to give a shit. A majority of people do seem to agree that we should fly more Union flags and St. George's crosses. But the perception on X is that there is a vicious conflict underway between town and city councils who are ashamed of the flag and proud patriotic flagtivists who really love it. But this doesn't seem to have caught on. When Made in Common asked people whether they thought flags being put up by activists should stay up or be taken down, most said that they either didn't know or that council should make a decision based on safety. Far from some big divisive conflict, most people simply couldn't care that much. And here's the pitfall for the right. Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter initially felt like it had the potential to pull all of political discourse to the right. Twitter, after all, might have always been a niche platform, but the abundance of journalists on it made it extremely powerful in setting the terms of political debate. Musk's vision has been partly borne out. And yet the creation of a parallel reality for right-wingers in which they're never required to come face to face with anyone who disagrees with them has stripped them of all proportionality or self-awareness. The cocoon that Elon has built for them seems to be encouraging them to not only get more extreme, but honestly, just kind of weird. Which might get a lot of reposts on X, but is likely to eventually find its limits among the ordinary people who are outside touching grass. And yet now is not the time to get complacent. If we don't want to see the real world become as hate-filled and conflict-ridden as the fantasists of right-wing X would like it to be, we need to ensure that cynical misinformation isn't able to establish a monopoly in online spaces. Which is a real risk, given the direction the economy of the internet is heading at the moment. Some of you will have noticed that the format of this video is a little different to the stuff that we've been making lately. It's a fair bit shorter, a good chunk simpler production value-wise, and released much sooner after our previous video. And that bucks a big trend when it comes not only to my channel, but YouTube careers more generally. This far into things, I should be making one video a decade and making no public pronouncements at all in the interim. But I'm not sure that even the monthly to 6 weekly schedule that I've been working on for the past couple of years is enough anymore to meet the political moment that we find ourselves in. I recently did a Patreon drive, out of grim necessity more than choice, and the key thing that I talked about was that I needed your support to allow us to continue to make good current affairs videos for the internet at a time when the economy of the internet would otherwise only allow us to make cheap, thoughtless slop. And I have no intentions of not coming good on that. We've got a bunch of big videos lined up for the rest of the year that we've been working on in the background for some time, which I think are really ambitious. But I've also been giving a lot of thought to how we fill the gaps in between. Because a world where we're putting out a video once every month or so, where right-wing cranks are churning stuff out daily, feels like not trying hard enough. When you also take into account the massive strain that a downturn in the YouTube economy is placing on a lot of creators of late, there's a very real risk of the internet sliding back to the place that it was in 2015 or so, where right-wing voices just absolutely dominate it. And I don't want to see that happen. So my team and I are currently toying around with some additional formats. We might do more monologue style pieces like this. You might have seen that we've been doing a bunch more short form stuff. We're also currently trying to work out the logistics of an interview series to help bring some different voices into the conversation rather than just mine. I'm very keen that we do all of that stuff well. I'm very cautious of avoiding a scenario where we're just churning out slightly more sensible slop to drown out the bad stuff, because slop is still slop. But my hope is that these new formats will allow us to cover more topics whilst also being more responsive to the stuff going on in the world. Our main videos just require so much lead-in that we miss covering stuff that needs covering. And I want to change that. All of this, however, is expensive and risky. One of the reasons that the right is able to churn out so much content is because they're flush with cash to fund big studios and teams, sometimes for podcasts with minimal audiences. We, on the other hand, are entirely reliant on YouTube AdSense, sponsorships, and the 1,051 people who chip in to support my work on Patreon. The first two of those are currently experiencing an industry-wide downturn. And even if they weren't, that last chunk from Patreon is really important. Because whilst it also fluctuates over time, it's not directly tied to individual videos doing well or not, meaning it can be an absolute saving grace during a run of flops or slightly more niche videos, which does happen. So I thought I'd take the risk of not arranging a sponsor for today's video so that I can use this spot to once again ask, if you think that the stuff that my small team and I make is valuable in any way, whether you'd consider helping us to continue to make more of it with a contribution to my Patreon at patreon.com/Tom Nicholas. There are perks to being a member. I do a weekly-ish blog. We also try and upload early snippets from videos as much as possible, but I've generally erred away from putting too much stuff behind a paywall. Even if uploading a video like this as a bonus video to help bring in some extra cash did work, for example, I just think it would go against the whole reason that I do this, which is to try and inject some more thoughtful perspectives into online spaces, which can be desperately lacking in them. I don't want to just build a silo of my own to counterbalance Elon's. I want to bring new ideas to new people, but we can only really do that with your support. That link again to find out about joining the Patreon is patreon.com/Tom Nicholas. Now time to thank some of those people who already are members. And without further ado, those top tier patrons that I need to say thank you to are Richard, Gary, Dick on Spain, Bill Mitchell, ZC Reese, Zoe Alden, Alexander Blank, Neil Bildgard, Sophia R, Sergio Suarez, Richard Rapoon, Amit Singh Parahar, Gabriel Koch, Jimmy Dunn, Fiasco Linguini, Agent Maxwell, Glenn Sugden, Emil, Jarabar, Yillimson, Paulius Edicus, Sam Fortunato, and Sondre Yarson Jean. If you want to join them in getting access to copies of scripts to the videos, early little bits when we can get them together. We like to get stuff out before it goes live to the public. I do like a little weekly blog thing about what I've been up to and what we're working on. You can find out all about that at patreon.com/Tom Nicholas. Thanks so much for watching once again, and I'll see you in the next video.